Nearly nodded off there, but no, not going to let you, sorry. You're awake till midnight. We've got Amanda Stoker coming up with us in a second. You're Worn Outsiders. You're with James Morrow and Rowan Dean. But best of all, you are, of course, every Monday night with Amanda Stoker. Amanda, welcome back to Outsiders.
Hello to you both.
You well? How you're in Canberra tonight?
I'm well, and the Senate's finished for the day, so you have my undivided attention.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Well, let's rip into the Burke Street killing, the slaying, the terrorism. You're someone on the opposite side of politics. In the Labor Party, we were just talking about Anne Alley, who considers herself to be a counter-terrorism expert, therefore someone the Labor Party will listen to if they do, horror of horrors, ever manage to form government in this country. She's come out saying that the Prime Minister, your boss, needs a little terrorism 101. What do you make of those comments, Amanda?
Well, look, she might be an academic in this field, but in a whole lot of policy areas we know that academics get it wrong. I actually think that Scott Morrison has hit the right note in his response to the Burke Street attack. He has called it out for what it is, and that is the kind of Islamic extremism that damages our community, that tries to make people live in fear, and that tries to stifle our happy and optimistic worldview that embraces people from everywhere. And he said that it's not on, and that people who lead the Islamic community need to step up, and they need to show some leadership to make sure this sort of thing isn't tolerated. We already have agencies in the intelligence field that are working overtime to keep us safe. But at a time when you've got digital encryption of communications, you've got people doing attacks using really quite basic household items, we really do need the Muslim community to cooperate. And, you know, we really want them to be a part of the Australian community, and it's a two-way street, so it requires stepping up.
But how much talk, Amanda, has there been today about, you know, there are 300 or 400 people on this watch list. You do have all of these policymakers who are supposedly, you know, keeping us safe, but people like this slip through. We had a huge number of people try and go to fight in IS. Why? What's being thought about? You know, Peter Dutton said maybe we should just let them go and get blown up over there. Where do you stand on all that? Is there more talk about this, you know, maybe changing our tack on this in response to this in Canberra?
Look, there hasn't been talk about a change of tack. I think one of the difficulties of this area is that for every one bad thing that happens, there are an enormous number prevented that we never hear about. I mean, what we do know is that although there are, you know, 400 people on this watch list, and that's the equivalent of a whole army battalion among our community who would seek to do us harm, we've also had, in the last couple of years, you know, no less than 90 people prosecuted for counter-terrorism offences, and we know that the attempts that are being made to stop this stuff have been effective. So it's a difficult thing, and we're always trying to balance the need to keep Australians safe with the need to protect all Australians' freedoms. You know, Australians' right to, for instance, be judged on their actions, not in a predictive kind of way. So it's a fine balance to strike, but I do think our authorities are probably getting it pretty close to right.
Now, Amanda, you heard me talking before about the Global Compact on Migration. I know this isn't your area, but it would be great if you could tap someone on the shoulder as you're walking past them in the Houses of Parliament and just say, can you please let us know what is happening on the Global Compact on Migration? Because if we were to go ahead and sign this thing, you can forget about any controls on who comes into this country from anywhere. It's open slather. What are your thoughts on immigration and where we should be heading?
I'm probably more informed on this than you might think. When I was at the bar, I had a lot of my practice being in migration law, and I was always struck by the significance of these international instruments in the applications that were being made by people to come to Australia. It all rested, for instance, in the refugee space on the UN declaration. And
so sorry, are you saying
there was always this.
So you're saying that people would use this at, like, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, try and use these refugee compacts, these global compacts, and try and use them as law here in Australia?
Well, look, the existing law is that the Migration Act assesses refugee or asylum seeker applications against the International Convention dealing with refugees. So that's quite conventional, but it tells us how the pattern works, and that is that if we sign up to these international treaties, we cede a little bit more of our sovereignty, and it's another basis upon which people can make these claims to come to Australia, and we lose our right to say no. John Howard had it right when he said, we'll decide who comes to this country in the circumstances in which they come. We should be very slow to move away from that.
I agree wholeheartedly. I hope
100%.
Scott Morrison is listening and does not sign Australia up to this thing. Now, Amanda, you're a senator for Queensland. Scott Morrison has been on his bus travelling around Queensland. The ABC got terribly excited because he got a plane a couple of times and they couldn't figure out how a plane and a bus. They obviously hadn't seen planes, trains and automobiles.
I think the ABC was more concerned that they offset all the carbon from the bus and the plane, you know?
Now, Amanda, 2 news polls today. So we had a news poll in The Australian saying doom and gloom for Scott Morrison. It's all over. Let's start, Bill Shorten can start measuring up the curtains and Anne Ali can start measuring up the spare bedroom in the lodge. But the Courier Mail had a different take. Having spent his week travelling around on the bus, it seems Queenslanders quite like this bloke. I noticed you were in a couple of the shots in one of the bus stops. I saw you very briefly. Amanda Stoker was walking past there. How was the trip received? And tell us about this opinion poll and your take on how your home state received Scott Morrison.
Well, first I'll tell you why the ABC must have responded the way they did, and that's that they don't realise how big Queensland is.
But well, I've never been there, so how would they?
Oh, well, that's right. They don't have those in Ultimo. Look, the Courier Mail has come out today with a poll that I think is really encouraging. And that says that on a 2PP basis, Labor and the LNP are 50-50, and that's an improvement on what you've seen in other polls. It also says that 46% of Queenslanders prefer Scott Morrison as Prime Minister versus 23% of people who prefer Bill Shorten. That's a pretty big difference. What I think that tells us is that the listening and action tour that Scott Morrison has done through Queensland over the last week has had an impact. It says that people like the fact that he's a pretty straight talker, that he gets along with everybody, he's pretty normal, and that he's unpretentious, and all of that I think plays pretty well in Queensland. But he also had some pretty good announcements too, you know, dealing with the shortage of seasonal farm labour, as in a practical sense, was really needed and really appreciated. He had some pretty big infrastructure announcements in relation to light rail on the Gold Coast, in relation to water infrastructure up north that is desperately needed. And most importantly, I think, as a team, we have started to really put the screws on Labor's pretty toxic negative gearing policy, because once people understand that it means if you own your own house, the value of your house is going down, and if you're renting, your rent's going to go a whole lot up, that it's a total lose-lose, they start to go, oh, hang on, what are we getting from the other team? Actually, you know, the stable, sensible, practical doer that we have from Scott Morrison and co is actually a pretty good option. So I think it's a sign of good things to come. I'm very optimistic, having seen the last week in Queensland.
You have the sunny, optimistic Queensland personality as well as the voters behind you. I've always said that if he can win Queensland, he can win this country, because Queenslanders represent the very best of this country, the heart and soul of this country. Certainly every time we've been up on Paul Murray Live to places like Rockhampton and Townsville, you meet the most amazing people, down-to-earth, common sense, great Aussies.
You mean Wentworth? No, not Wentworth?
Not Wentworth.
Not Wentworth, okay.
But I was hoping, Amanda, when I saw you in one of those shots with Scott Morrison, that you would sneak into his little notepad and get his notes for the speech and just write, "Pull out of Paris" at the top of the notes. So I was hoping there that I might hear some very good news, which would certainly win him the next election, and he wouldn't have to worry about any opinion polls whatsoever. Now, now we have on the front of the Australian, so we've got we've got Scott Morrison backing Trump, which we've talked about, and we've also got the negative polling for ALP housing, which you've been referring to. So some things there, Amanda, backing up what you're saying there. But I also, now that you're also a resident of the ACT, I'm fascinated.
I'm not a resident.
Well, OK, you're not a resident. You spend a lot of your working time there in the ACT. I was fascinated. Have you seen this particular billboard, Amanda? It's a billboard which we're going to put up on the screen, and it shows a girl on a bicycle in a bikini, and your local government there in the ACT, the planning authorities, want to ban this advertisement appearing anywhere near building sites. Yeah, are they completely lefty loonies there in Canberra? Is the government completely insane, or is this the sort of thing that you have to put up with?
Yeah, look, I haven't seen that hoarding on the street with my own eyes. I've only seen the pictures that you've got on the screen. But, look, I'm a pretty prudish person. I'll give you that up front. And I don't find this person riding a bike in a swimsuit offensive at all. If you want to get picky, it might be done for being misleading and deceptive, because nobody rides around Canberra, particularly in the winter, in a swimsuit. But other than that...
Fantastic.
I mean, I do think there is something to be said, though, for a need for getting the balance right in advertising standards. I mean, I hate it when I walk through a shopping centre and I've got to divert my kids through a different route because, you know, the Honey Birdette window is so very provocative that I don't want to be answering questions from my kids about what, you know, what's that bondage equipment. So I don't think that's getting the balance right, and I think the Advertising Standards Board and, you know, Westfield and some of the other shopping centres really do need to do better there. But that's a far cry from what's on this hoarding in the ACT. It's a long way off.
Quickly before you go, just back to Queensland. Queensland State Labor, you wanted to talk a little bit about how they're putting their green ideas over the mining job. So Labor being a little bit, basically being very Bingley-ish and going even further left than they would normally. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So at a time when legislation dealing with the requirements on mining companies to, you know, restore to a good condition the environment after they've done their mining, the legislation's already gone through committee. They've now slotted in, after that scrutiny process, a whole bunch of amendments that would retrospectively impose up to $104 billion worth of remediation costs on existing projects. So, you know, companies have already invested in Queensland. They've done the numbers based on believing that the laws were of a certain kind. They're now having that completely, you know, pulled out from underneath them. And the consequence of this is that 11 producers that control 16 mines are you know, on the maths that's available to us, likely to go under. So that's 2,500 much-needed mining jobs in Queensland pulled away from us. I mean, we can't forget, Queensland is fundamentally a mining state. You know, we do a lot of other things good too, but we depend for our prosperity on the mining sector. And this is yet another effort from Jackie Trad to appeal to those inner-city Greens who very nearly knocked her off for the seat of South Brisbane at the last election. And she's doing that city virtue signalling on the environment at the expense of ordinary families trying to put food on the table in places like Mackay and Rockhampton and, you know, all of the small towns that surround it. And it's cruel and it's wrong, and it's so bad of a signal for those who want to invest in Queensland. The sovereign risk message it sends is just awful.
Amanda Stoker, Queenslanders are very lucky to have you in their corner fighting for them, all the way from Mackay to Rockhampton and elsewhere. Thanks again. We'll see you next Monday, and enjoy Canberra, and keep an eye out for those very sexy posters.
Thanks, Amanda.
I'll give you a report.